Welcome back to Creepy Confidential. I'm your host, Noelle, your resident weirdo Wisconsinite. I open case files on my favorite cryptids, cults, conspiracies, and other worldly creepy. Bringing you new cases, live broadcasts, local lore, and in Season 2 we bring you the Cult of the Month. So get ready, creeps. It's Season 2 of Creepy Confidential. Between the good and evil beings of all mythologies, there is often one whose qualities are mixed. Not wholly good nor entirely evil, but balanced between the two. Sometimes doing a generous action, then descending to a petty meanness, but never rising to nobility of character nor sinking to the depths of depravity. Good from whim and mischievous from caprice. Such a being is the leprechaun of Ireland, a relic of the pagan mythology of that country. By birth, the leprechaun is of low descent, his father being an evil spirit and his mother a degenerate fairy. By nature, he is a mischief maker, the Puck of the Emerald Isle. He is of diminutive size, about 3 feet high, and is dressed in a little red jacket or roundabout, with red breeches buckled at the knee, gray or black stockings, and a hat cocked in the style of a century ago over a little, old, withered face. Round his neck is an Elizabethan ruff, and his frills of lace are at his wrists. On the wild west coast, where the Atlantic winds bring almost constant rains, he dispenses with ruff and frills and wears a frieze overcoat over his pretty red suit, so that unless on the lookout for the cocked hat, ye might pass a leprechaun on the road and never know it's himself that's in it at all. D.R. McAnally, Irish Wonders, 1888. What's up, creeps? Happy Saint Patricks Day. As you prepare your recipe for corned beef and cabbage, soda bread, and your favorite pint, let's dive into one of the most well-known icons of Saint Patrick's Day, leprechauns. Tales of these little beings started popping up in the 1700s, and lore of tiny water-dwelling creatures started circulating among the Celts. These solitary, fairy-like creatures are usually depicted as little bearded men, 2 to 3 feet tall, wearing a coat, a hat, either green or originally red until the 19th century, who like to partake in mischief. Water cooler talk started in the 8th century about these little sprites, and they called them leprechauns, which means small body. Somewhere along the way, these little guys merged with the common household fairy and also developed a heavy love for drinking. The word for leprechaun is apparently created from the word leithbrogan, which is a heavy and high-ankled shoe or boot that was used for army soldiers and was made and worn in Ireland and Scotland in the 16th century. I guess if you say it fast, leithbrogan, it's kind of like leprechaun. Just like many of our words or holidays here in America, somehow we've managed to morph and mangle pronunciations to make them fit into the usual American language, American English language, in the pronunciations that are now far from the root. Anywho, the first time we see this little character, it appears in Middleton and Decker's The Honest Whore, a comedic drama play from 1604, in a character called Lubrican. And I'll quote, "As for your Irish lubricant, your spirit whom by preposterous charms thy lust has raised." Again, you'll have to excuse my Wisconsinite language, but hopefully we did it a little bit of justice. The tricky part in discussing leprechauns is the polarizing nature when leprechauns are discussed. On one hand, they celebrate Irish folklore culture, and then on the other hand, it's kind of a caricature of Ireland. So I like to discuss a little bit of both. Kind of makes more sense that way. So leprechauns. This tiny old man is solitary by nature. They live in remote places, building shoes, and the sound of their hammering is often what gives away their position in the countryside. He has a hidden pot of gold, and if captured or threatened with bodily violence, if you keep your eyes on him, he will reveal his location among the Irish countryside. Take your eyes off them, and they will disappear. These small cobblers, when seen, are always making or mending a single fairy-sized shoe. The oral history is full of tales of these little people, but are difficult to date. The earliest reference to leprechauns is in the tale The Death of Fergus mac Liet, which was composed about 1100 AD. And it's this tale that is supposedly what gave Jonathan Swift his inspiration for Gulliver's Travels. Leprechauns always carry 2 leather pouches. One is a small silver shilling, a magical coin that returns to the purse every time it's paid out, as a little trickster move. The other one is he carries a gold coin, a little bit more enticing, and he uses this to try and bribe his way out of difficult situations. But the trick about this coin is that it usually will turn to leaves or ash once the leprechaun has parted with it. In Clare and Galloway counties, the favorite pastime of the leprechaun is riding a sheep or goat, or even a dog if the other animals are not available. If the sheep look weary in the morning, or the dog is muddy and worn out and just looks absolutely tired, there's a good chance your local leprechaun has been going on some errands that are farther away than he's willing to walk himself in his drunken stupor. Now, aside from riding the sheep and dogs almost to the point of death, leprechauns are credited with mischief around the house and hearth. Sometimes he will make the hearth pot boil over and put out the fire, and then making it impossible for the pot to boil at all. He will steal the bacon flitch, perhaps gifted from a recently married couple, or occasionally will throw the few poor articles of furniture around the room with strength, all too disproportionate to his own tiny little size. But his mischievous pranks are seldom more than to drink up all the milk or booze, and then to return and fill the bottles with water. Not cool, Mr. Leprechaun. Let me just tell you, you show up in this house and you fill my Jameson bottle with water, we're going to have words. We're probably going to have more than words. In fact, if you fill up Vinny's milk, his milkies, with water, he will fight you. I'm telling you. And for those listening to this that know Vinny, our little trusty sidekick, Captain Chaos, he might actually be able to take on a leprechaun pound for pound. I'm talking serious business. Side note, if any of you guys have seen Vinny on our Instagram, or if you follow kind of our personal Instagrams, he's our little void. He's the tiniest dude in the house, like a little leprechaun, and I'm pretty sure he was raised by leprechauns. He is Captain Chaos. Maybe that's why he was found roaming the roads of Columbus, because the leprechaun had just had enough of him and booted him out. But they taught him tricks before he left. Anyway, back to leprechauns. So there's a few other areas in the northern counties. He is the Logarryman in Tipperary. He is the Lurgadon. And in Kerry, he is the Luricon, a little bit closer to leprechaun. And then in Mogutnaghan, please excuse the pronunciations, I tried to look them up, the Churicon is typically the night rider, as I like to call him, of the leprechauns. He's the one who's cruising around on the sheep and dogs in his drunken stupor, wearing them out. Now, the dress also varies between all these different types of leprechauns. Some of them seem to have a little bit more pizzazz to them. Different types of clothing show up in different depictions of leprechauns. Now, one of them wears the uniform of a British infantry regiment style, a red coat and white breeches, but instead of that kind of cap that we all know from the red coats, he wears a broad-brimmed, high, pointed hat. And after doing some trick more than unusually mischievous, his favorite position is to poise himself on the extreme point of his hat, standing at the top of a wall or on a house, feet in the air, then laugh heartedly and disappear in true leprechaun fashion. The Lerigodon appears in an antique slashed jacket of red. It has peaks all around and a jockey-type cap, also sporting a sword, kind of like the first regiment, which he uses as a magic wand. The Leprechaun is a fat, more pursy little fellow, his jolly, round face, similar to some of the depictions we see now, that rivals in the redness of these red jackets. So his face is red. That always has 7 rows of 7 buttons in each row. Now, we don't know what this is necessary for because he's never been seen with the jacket buttoned, and that we're actually see him with the jacket more like falling away from the shirt. Now, when in full dress, he wears a helmet, several sizes too large for him, but in generally, it's just too large for him, and it has a tendency to kind of render him a little more conspicuous in the countryside where helmets just aren't seen in that area. So he'll wrap his head in a handkerchief that he ties over his ears. I kind of reimagine him in like a Tupac tied around his ears, with the tie in the front. Only we need to know what color. I couldn't find any reference as to what color the scarf was. Now, the Cluricaun, those are those drunken sheep riding folks. They're a little bit more detailed in their dress. They're gorgeously arrayed in a swallow-tailed kind of evening coat with red and green above, like a vest, white breeches, black stockings instead of white stockings, and shoes that kind of have such a crazy shine on them. They look very, very high class. His hat is a kind of long cone without a brim and is usually kind of set, kind of jaunted to one side. So his little, curly hair can pop out. Now with this one though, when he's kind of greatly poked at, he will sometimes take crazy vengeance by suddenly ducking and poking the sharp point of this hat into the eye of the offender. So be careful. A piece of strange information that I came across is that the leprechaun family have an intense hatred of schools and schoolmasters. The literature says that it's kind of perhaps from the ridicule of them by teachers when they said, they have disbelief, they don't believe, and that it really insults them. And he just doesn't even want to be in a neighborhood where a school has been established. So oftentimes, if you're looking for leprechauns, you're not going to find them anywhere near a school. So something to think about. Now, of course, if you have areas where schools are starting to become more populated, schools are becoming more prevalent, the problem is those leprechaun numbers are going to drop. But if I was looking for them, I would then say that the areas that don't have schools, the more rural areas, are going to have a higher concentration of leprechauns because they're running. It's kind of like how the wildlife have no place to go. Neither do the leprechauns. Now, leprechauns are always seen alone. Now, of course, a lot of people say it's by preference. Kind of learned the hollowness of fairy friendship and the deceitfulness of the fairy femininity, the girls. And he just left society of his kind in disgust and its lack of sincerity. And I thought about this. I was like, Self, Mr. Creep and I, we can feel on that one. We can feel that in our souls. We would also just like to leave people behind. There are some cool ones, but they're pretty rare. Now, from after this backstory on leprechauns, this is where we start to finally take a little turn into the creepy. For those who have hung on through the history portion, let's talk creepy. Moving along further in the history of leprechauns, according to Carolyn White's A History of Irish Fairies, there is no record of any female leprechauns existing. This, of course, means that leprechauns defy the typical laws of biology by surviving, and there is no evidence which tells the story of how they breed. Now, the book that I just mentioned, History of Irish Fairies, says that leprechauns are actually deformed children of the fairies. Now, speaking of deformities, these bones are something else that I happened across. In a sighting, as recently as 1989 by a pub landlord called P.J. O'Hare in Carlingford County, Louth. In a local pub known as H. O'Hare, the original owner of this pub was a leprechaun hunter and would often go into the hills in a search of these little leprechaun men. The story goes, the pub owner went out one day way back in 1946 and captured a little rascal called Sean. He took him back to his pub and forced him to live in captivity, letting him out occasionally to entertain the drinkers with his music. For years, he tried to coerce the wily little fellow to give up the secret of his treasure. But Sean proved too clever for his captor and always managed to talk his way around it, often sending his captor on a wild goose chase. 55 years later, apparently, Sean finally made his escape, sneaking out one evening in 2001 after luring his captor into a night of wild music and drinking. Once the owner was suitably inebriated, Sean slipped quietly out the back door. Now, Hare claimed that he heard screams from a well and found the leprechaun's discarded clothes and bones on this mountainside, along with some gold coins. He states the leprechaun was attacked by a demon, and this gentleman believes that this was one of more than 200 leprechauns that live on this peninsula just below the mountain. The interesting part is this town now has an annual leprechaun hunt. Now, the object of the game is to find plastic versions of this fabled creature. The remains and the clothing that he found of this leprechaun are on display in this pub. So what I want to know on a secondary portion is this place haunted by a leprechaun? It's like a twofer. You get a leprechaun and you get a haunting. I need to know. I need to know. Now, another interesting portion is leprechauns are actually a protected species under the EU law. Carlingford's Loop Trail that's out there is officially protected land for the 236 leprechauns, 236 very precise, that apparently live in Ireland. And a local lobbyist group, which contains Kevin Woods, the gentleman who was after the leprechaun, managed to convince the EU that the area should be protected and is now under the European Habitats Directive. That's pretty cool. I have to think, even if you don't believe in leprechauns, it's a cool way to bring in people, and it's also a cool way to protect the lands. I found an interesting sign that kind of cracked me up, but also was like, that's neat. It's like only in Ireland. That says that this part of land is protected. You can't hunt them there. A letter from the EU's European Environment Agency announcing the plans to protect the area reads, it provides for increased protection to a variety of wild animals, plants, and habitats, and in particular, the protection of the habitat of leprechauns, the little people of Ireland. We are aware that Carlingford Mountains is unique in that it is the last recognized area of mountain in Ireland where these little people are known to exist. We are aware that their numbers have dwindled to levels near extinction. I like that. And then as I was looking at this, so the signage really made me smirk though, but also made me want to go look for leprechauns in the mountainside. So as we wrap up today's episode, I hope everyone had a wild ride. Be safe this St. Patty's season and leave the drunk driving to the sheep riding cluricans. I leave you with a quote from one of my top 10 movies, especially on St. Patty's Day, Boondock Saints.
Yeah, it's St. Patricks Day. Everyone's Irish tonight. Why don't you just pull up a stool and have a drink with us?